PRRS is still the main challenge on our farms. When you think you've got PRRS under control, you have PRRS again. So, the fight goes on, and we keep standing by your side, as we have done for 10 years now. We have sold 215 million doses, with a supply guarantee over these last 10 years. We have demonstrated protection against highly pathogenic strains, and our hipradermic needle-free device represents a step forward in intradermal vaccination against PRRS. The fight against PRRS goes on, as does our commitment.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here with you in this nice hotel in Seoul, a real important city here in the eastern part of the world from our perspective in the West. Do you know, by the way, what the term HIPRA means? I think it's also new for the HIPRA staff. It means healthy, intelligent pigs require attention. So, let's go to the trends in the world in production and consumption of animal protein. And since I'm a senior pig production economist, I will focus on pigs. I'm working in Wageningen University and Research, to be more precise in the research, the R. I'm working in this building here in the front. Wageningen is maybe not the biggest university in the world, but we have some 13,000 students and 2,500 PhDs and 7,000 staff. But it's known in the world when it comes to agriculture. I like to start with a couple of pictures that most of them I made myself worldwide. In the upper left, it's a modern farm in the Netherlands, a sow farm with a few thousand sows. The next one is in Mexico. I visited last year in a farrowing room. I was not really impressed, to be honest. It's a lot of iron and a little space and not so much attention. But on the farm, there were 1,000 sows and there were 30 people working. 30 people working. Well, that's different to the Netherlands. It is in Ukraine, the upper right side, before the war. Brazil. Here we have Spain, the pata negra, the black feet, the very special focus on added value. Here we have Ukraine again. When it comes to labor efficiency, it's very nice. The entire village is working in this farm. Those ladies had only one task, to take care of the boars. That was their task. This is in Brazil, this is in Lithuania, United Kingdom, this is in China. In the supermarket, you could touch the carcasses. I didn't do myself because I understand biosecurity a little bit, but that's no biosecurity. If you can touch the carcasses and then you sell the stuff, that's no food safety. This is a warning shield along the border in Germany. For Polish drivers, take care to not throw away your food with sausages, because that's a risk of ASF. This is a farm in South Korea. I visited last time I was here 5 years ago, and I asked the farmer, do you know, can you tell me a little bit about your performance on the farm? And he was hesitating, he was not willing to share the information, but I asked, what about mortality? 1%, sir. 1%. Okay, I didn't ask any more. And then I asked the veterinarian afterwards, and the veterinarian told me, 1%, well, that's indeed a bit low, yes. That might be after weaning. Well, even so. Congrats. I don't believe it. This is in China. I didn't make the picture myself. It is from the Weibo network. It is, I think you all know it, a 26-store high house, so to say, for pigs. And well, this is, in some perspective, the future for China. But they also face quite some troubles, and they will face it, not the least in labor and the quality of the workers. Well, let's go to the content of my lecture. We see an increasing population, that's the right graph. Increasing population prospected, we are now in 2024, 2030, 40, 50, but where is mainly the growth? It will be in Asia. It will be here in these countries, in your countries, and it will be in Africa. Asia and Africa. And when you look, where are the people living? You see there the map, and where are the animals living? It's more or less the same map, you see? So this is logic. Where people are, there are animals, because we want to eat animals or we want to eat the products of the animals. From the total pig meat production worldwide, only some 7% is being traded among trade blocs. 7%. The rest is produced on the spot, so to say. So within China, within Asia, within North America, within Europe. And why do I say that? Because we think that there is a lot of export, and there is need for export, and there is, but relatively this is small. So it must be done here. The demand for pig meat must be filled here. Also here in South Korea, the self-sufficiency of pig meat is about 60%. There's a lot of demand. So lots of opportunities to improve the performance. Let's dive into that in the next slides also. Now, just very brief, we know the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, and there is the challenge. It's nice to improve the performance level, to improve the number of piglets weaned per sow and year to maybe 30 or even 40, as some farms do. But if it's not sustainable, you have another challenge to do. So it must be done in an integrated way. Now let's go to consumption. I made this picture in Wageningen. I invited a group of Interpig, which is a group of pig production economists, to Wageningen in 2015. And we wanted to show, okay, we like pig meat, and we ordered this small pig, and it was not a Korean barbecue, but a Dutch barbecue, so to say. When it comes to consumption, this is a quite complicated graph, but I'll explain you. This is from the OECD FAO outlook. In the world, you see this is the total consumption of meat in different kinds. This is in the period in the past, 2018 to 20 on the average, and 2030, so in the future. There's hardly any difference, you see, per capita, per person. So per person, the consumption will not change so much. But on the country level, it will, because I just showed you we will have an increasing population in the world. And you see that there is quite some difference. In North America has a very high meat consumption at the left, going down all the way to Africa. So here is, at least theoretically, a lot of room to further improve the meat consumption. And meat consumption is related to income. But first I will show where are the pigs. I showed you where are the people living, where are the animals. This is a map that a colleague of mine was making. The more dark, the more pigs are in a country. As you can imagine, it's China, it's India, but also South Korea, it's quite dark, Russia, North America, Brazil, some African country, and also Western Europe. There are the pigs. And there is the consumption. Not in Africa. Now, I selected a couple of countries to show the total production of a couple of regions. And foremost is China. You see the upper line, and a constantly increasing production of pigs up to 2014, roughly. And here we see the reduction in 2020 after the severe outbreak of African swine fever. We know it. But that had a lot of consequences. What we see here in Europe is a quite constant production, but after the dip in the production in China, there was a lot of demand from everywhere in the world to export to China. And after that, there was a surplus of production worldwide, and then others had to reduce their production. That is what's happening here in Europe, for example. Here we see 2022, 23, and 24, and this led to high prices in Europe. So at this moment, we have quite high prices in Europe because of the reduction of the production. And this is what we call the pig cycle. I will not explain it right now, I don't have time for that. USA, and then comes Brazil as the next producer. Some people might think Brazil is a very important, a very large producer in pig meat. Well, they are important, but not that large compared to USA or Europe. And then, because we are here, Russia is increasing and will further increase because they have a lot of feed and good export opportunities to China. And here is, because we're here in South Korea, the total production is not that big, but it is increasing. Now again, a bit complicated picture, but let's pick out Europe. The total production in Europe in the last decade was growing. That's the green bar. But in the current decade, it is reducing. That's Europe, and in other places in the world, it's different. Africa, there's a relatively big growth in the past, and we expect a further growth in the current decade. And on world level, the total production is increasing some 1.1% per year. That's not so much, maybe, but every produced pig requires attention. Healthy, intelligent pigs, you know, they require attention and they require veterinarian supervision. So there's work for you. ASIA is a strong grower, but in the past it wasn't because of the African swine fever in China, but apart from the ASF outbreak, it's a grower. So there's room for work for you and room for further increase. Now I like this picture. I made a compilation of almost all countries in the world. We calculated the GDP, so let's say the income per person, compared to the meat consumption per person. And what you see then here is the poorest countries have very low meat consumption. And the richer they are, up to, let's say, $20,000 to $40,000 per person per year, the meat consumption is increasing constantly. So the more income you have, the more wealth, the more you can spend to meat. Because meat is a kind of a luxury good. It's not a basic. So if you have more money, you can spend more. But then comes the interesting part. When income increases to more than $40,000, then you see that the meat consumption, the total meat consumption, is even reducing a little bit. People become more aware of what they are doing. They have more ethical considerations. In the next slide, I'll come back to that. And there you see there is a kind of a gap. There's not only a gap, which can be filled by alternatives, next slide then, but also you see an increase in beef. You see the gray area is the beef, and it's increasing still. So the total meat consumption is going down, but the beef consumption is increasing. And beef is more expensive, so it is spent to more expensive meat. And not only to more expensive the beef, but also to organic, to vegan, to meat alternatives, etc. So I call this the consumption gap, the meat consumption gap. Now, meat alternatives are growing. The total turnover in meat substitutes, and meat substitutes include laboratory meat, but also meat-based, a kind of meat, let's say it's alternative meat based on peas and soy, and also insect protein. So that is what is called meat substitutes. And you see a constantly increasing line, and especially in Europe and in the US, there's quite a high turnover. Why in these countries? Well, remind the high GDP that I expressed before. There's a good income in these countries, so many people switch to meat substitutes, or partially switch to meat substitutes. Now, sometimes when I go out eating with my wife, I make a picture, and that is what I did over there, and that can be used here, that's nice. A nice picture of meat. I like to eat meat. Well, a little bit of focus on consumption patterns here in, in Western Europe, and partially they also apply to the regions here in Asia. There's less time to shop and to prepare food. Well, that's the same case here in Asia. Everyone is very busy, so it must be ready to heat, ready to cook, ready to eat. There are many people who would like to have an authentic story. So they buy meat, but it must be meat from the neighbor, from the farmer in the neighborhood. It must be butchered by the well-known butcher on the corner. Or it should be organic, and you should have trust in it, and that's the case behind. You should have trust in it. And when people are buying meat, they want to tell their family, look, I bought it there, and therefore I know I can trust it. Transparency, very important, and also the place where the animals were born and bred and raised and slaughtered and processed, consumers would like to know. Not that they are really interested, but it gives trust to them. If I know where the animal was born, I do trust the supply chain. Animal welfare, environmental protection, these are topics that come back, especially in the high-income areas. Less meat consumption, I mentioned already, especially the pork. Flexitarian, I don't know, do you know this term? Flexitarian means one day you eat meat and another day you eat vegetarian. So that is changing, and the one day is different from another. That's flexitarian. And vegans, there are vegans also in Western Europe, but the amount of vegans is hardly growing. It's not so very, very important. And also e-commerce, sales over internet. So there are some trends in Western Europe, and I think they are also here in this area, most of them. Then I like this Maslow pyramid. You might have heard of Maslow. He is well known by everyone. He was a Russian philosopher and a psychologist in 1943 already. And he said, well, we as people, we have our needs. And the basic need is physiologically. We have hunger. We want to eat. And the next one, when this is filled, then we have need for safety and security. So to translate into meat terms, I want my meat to be safe. No antibiotics, residues in it. But then the next demand, the next need is the love and belonging. So to say, we want to eat together. I'm no more hungry. I feel safe with this product, but I want to eat together with my friends or family. Then there's self-esteem and the self-actualization. You could say the self-esteem, I want to take care of the welfare of the pigs. That is self-esteem. Or self-actualization, I would express it a bit differently. Look, I am vegan. And that is what we see. So there is a changing pattern of behavior in people, changing needs, different needs of people. And especially in the top part of the pyramid, there the people have interest in ethical issues such as animal welfare, environmental protection, but also antimicrobial resistance, etc. And there are the vegans. There are the ones who want to eat meat substitutes and organic, etc. So you can imagine we all are, I think, wealthy and we have a high income. So especially we, more than the people living in the suburbs or on the countryside, are interested in such issues. So I can tell already to you what is your interest. We are eating meat. We ate meat yesterday and it was nice, but sometimes we are also open to alternatives. Now let's go to the pig production, more down to the earth. And I think this is more down to what you are doing usually in your work. A couple of years ago, I drafted this conceptual model. And it is a combination of factors that play a role in whether or not you're competitive on the world level. Not as a farm, but as a country. But you could also apply it to a farm. So the foremost factor is the human factor. Who is the farmer? Who are the workers? How do they work? Are they aware of what they are doing? Are they motivated to improve to the utmost best? So the human factor is the number one. I'll explain it as one of the 5 elements in my next slide. Then comes the farm structure, the farm size, so let's say the buildings, the hardware, as well as the use of management information system. Cooperation among farmers. Is there cooperation among farmers? When I look at the European situation, in Denmark, farmers are really willing to cooperate, more than in the Netherlands. So that gives them a competitive advantage. Are farmers here in Asia willing to exchange information? Less than they are in Europe. I tried to set up, we did a project in South Korea in the years 2017 till 2022. Yes, in the time of COVID and also ASF. But we tried to check different kinds of knowledge exchange. And one of them was the study club. It's a phenomenon that we have in Northwestern Europe where farmers are sitting together, some 10 or 15 farmers, and they're open to each other, explaining, well, this is what I do in my management, these are my performance results, and yes, there is the problem in my farm. And they are open for discussion. and being open to each other and saying, look, there are my problems. You need some trust, you know. And this kind of trust among each other is important to be able to share information, to share data. So, cooperative among each other. The external inputs, the animal health situation, feed availability, but also capital availability. Who is taking care of the capital when investing in a new farm? Is capital available? Risk management. Well, the risks in pig production have enormously increased in the last 10 years, given the turmoil of the ASF in China and in many other countries, the feed prices that are going up and slowly down, so the risks have increased. Risk is really an important factor as well. Then, how is the supply chain organized? What about the external factors, the society? Governmental attitude. The government here in South Korea has a fund for smart farming. They want to develop the Korean animal husbandry and say, look, please invest in robots, in intelligent systems in your farm. And that's nice, but not sufficient. I'll come back to that. But at least there's the governmental attitude. In the Netherlands, farmers have a lot of requirements, but they're not subsidized. It's more like a stepmother. A lot of demands and no money. And then the 7th block is about the profitability. And all these 6 other blocks are influencing the profitability. And the 7 blocks together, they are explaining competitive position of a country. Now, I'll pick out 5 elements to elaborate them a bit more in detail. The human skills, I mentioned it already a bit, data, production efficiency, feed availability, and last but not least, at least for you, is animal health. The human skills. It is important to have concerned employees, not just hands, if I may say so. It's easy for workers to follow a protocol and say, look, this is in the protocol, I have to do this and that. It's this time I have to open this or that valve, or to move the pigs to the other department, that's it, without any consideration. Yeah. So there is a need for concerned employees and skilled managers. There's a lack of workers. That's also the case here in Asia. Everywhere in the world, almost everywhere in the world, it's hard to find employees who are willing to do the work and who are affordable because they're very expensive. In some areas of the world, the workers cost about €3 per hour or less. In other parts, like in Northwestern Europe, they cost €30 per hour. So they must be very, very effective, and that's the case. Labor efficiency. There's need for training, and we developed a training model for China with a train-the-trainer concept. So, because many workers in Chinese farms are not really aware of what's going on, they are just following the protocols, and they were not educated, they require a train-the-trainer concept. So there must be people in the farm who feel aware of what is necessary, and they are training the other workers. Now, with all these elements, there's also a lot of smart farming needed, and that's good. And the message here is, I advise to unlock the human skills, because people do have skills. Workers in your farms, in the farms of your customers, do have skills. So please unlock them. Raise their awareness, raise their responsibility feeling. And yes, there is technology, but technology should always support the workers, not take the place of the workers. But then an integrated approach is necessary, and that makes also the link to the next point. It's nice to have technology. I put it here as a machine. So that's a smart machine, like some selection gate based on RFID tags whatsoever. But it's also breeding material, it's also vaccines, anything that is tangible. It's nice to have this. But you need also data and management information systems, because if you don't know what is going on the farm, and you're not really elaborating it and analyzing the data of the farm, you don't know what you are deciding. So how can you manage without management information? But the third is the awareness. So the farmer, the farm workers, the employees, all should be aware of what is going on in the farm, and they should be involved, and their capabilities should be unlocked. And if you don't have this combination of the three, you will not be successful. You will not come to the top. And there's a challenge, especially for ASIA, this awareness element. We did a study in South Korea, I mentioned already, and we asked the farmers, how often do you use a management system? Do you use a management system at all? Well, 1,500 sow farms in South Korea do apply a management system, but it's only half of the sows. Only half of the sows. So the other farms do not use a management system, and hardly I'm finishing. And then we asked, how often do you use it? Well, a large group said, well, about once a month. Congrats, it's not helpful. Or once a week. Okay, that's already a bit better. But this is not the way how we should use management information systems. And I think, Carlos, you will dive into that later, isn't it? Yeah. So the frequency and the in-depth use of management information system is necessary for top performance. And one example, non-productive days, you're aware of it. I don't need to explain it. Two countries, once again, Korea and the Netherlands. This frequency diagram. In the Netherlands, it's the orange line. You see most of the farms have between, let's say, 10 and 20 days lost days, or non-productive days per sow per cycle. On average, it's 13.3 per cycle. But in Korea, many farms do well. They have also 10 to 20, or even 20 to 30, that's fine. But what about this? Some farms have more than 70 non-productive days per cycle. What does that mean? They do not know what they do. They do have pigs, and still they are surviving, but they are not managing pigs. When it comes to data, currently we see there is a lot of sensor data already used, controlling the environment, feed, water, weighing and sorting, but also connection between cloud-based solutions. But in the future, we will see more developments. And here is a right nice development because new sensor-based applications, and especially when all the pigs will have an own RFID tag, also the finishing pigs and the piglets, then there are biosensors and non-invasive sensors. So there's lots of opportunities in the farms. When it comes to efficiency development, there's two historic graphs. On one hand, in the sow farm, the PSY and the MSY, so the number of piglets weaned and the number of pigs sold, slaughter pigs per sow and year, a constant increase. And here is the feed efficiency, and you see there is some kind of bottoming out, the average in the Netherlands. But here is a lot of variation. Some farms do have 2.2, others have 2.7, 2.8, somewhere in that region or even higher. So there's also in the Netherlands, in a highly effective, efficient production, there's room for further improvement. And when we compare it internationally, just briefly, this is from Interpeak. The countries, we see two parameters. The blue bars are the MSY, so the number of pigs produced per sow and year, and the orange dot is the feed conversion of the farrow to finish farm, the total feed use. And you see there's a lot of variation, and these are the countries in Interpeak. But based on other data, I put it at the left, there are countries with an average MSY of 14, and others MSY 32. From one sow producing 14 or 32 slaughter pigs. You can imagine there's a lot of room. And also the OFCR, the overall feed conversion ratio. Ukraine, they told Ukrainian, they told me, well, the feed conversion ratio on all of our farms is somewhere 4.5. 4.5, okay? There are many, many reasons behind. But I want to come to the last two elements, otherwise I get out of time. The feed availability, and I show you a few maps of the world. The area that is dotted yellow, there are crops harvested. But crops are not feed. So I had a look at the food insecurity. That is food. Where is the food insecurity? Well, let's look at Russia. That's That's a country with a lot of export of food. On the other hand, the African countries, they are red. They have lack of feed ingredients. Or to say it differently, and I apologize for the low quality of the map, but especially the orange and the yellow dotted areas, they are producing crops for feed. So there is room for animal production. And then finally, the fifth point, that's the animal health. The picture on the left-hand side was made here in this country. It is not a telephone booth, it's a disinfection unit. And visitors are expected to enter the booth and to be sprayed by citric acid solution, and there is some UV light shed on you. I was on this farm, it was a demonstration farm, but I was not asked to enter this booth. So I was not disinfected. It doesn't work, and it's not used. So a lot of ASF here around in Asia. So because you are veterinarians and I am an economist, time is up, I know, yeah, thank you. Just a very short information. There's a lot of variation among farms in the pre-weaning mortality. I'll tell you, there's an economic value. If you can save 1% of pre-weaning mortality, you save about €4.6 per sow and year for 1%. And also in the grow finishing mortality. So if a pig is to die, when should it die? Definitely in the abattoir, right? But if that's not possible, if it doesn't make it to the abattoir, when then? Well, my point is as early as possible, because a piglet, when it's born, €37 value, it's increasing up to the final value of €217. And when a pig is to die and does not come to the end, then please have it euthanized as early as possible. I have to quit, and I'm sorry, I have only a few slides left, but otherwise my wrap up, there is an increase in pork demand, especially in developing countries. That's what we have seen. There is some room for meat alternatives. And then my 5 points, the need to unlock the human skills, and I would really highlight this point, the human skills. And the other is what I mentioned already, combination of technology, strong growth in data and high-tech applications. Feed availability in a country or in an area is paramount, is really necessary. There's lots of room to improve the production efficiency. And finally, yes, there is substantial effect, and that's the bridge to your work, let's say, of good animal health. Thank you for your attention.